It's July 25th, 2022, and this is the Watson Weekly, your essential e-commerce digest. Today on our show, we have the 1-year anniversary of the Watson Weekly, and with that, we have a special guest host for the episode, David Hoffman, who's the principal at CitizenRacecar. He's a production partner for the Watson Weekly.
Hey, Rick, it's so fun to be here. Congratulations, Mazel Tov, a full year of episodes.
1 year. I'm as excited as you are, my friend.
So we thought it would be fun. Like you said, I work with CitizenRacecar. We've been helping you produce the show from the beginning. And we thought just to do something special to mark your first anniversary, maybe we'd spin things around, we'd pull back the curtain a little bit, and actually interview you about the process of making the show, let people see into what goes into it every week and where you're coming from and maybe where we'll be going for the next year.
That sounds great. I'm really excited about that, David.
All right. First of all, how's it feel to be on the other side of the microphone here?
A little nerve-wracking, I'll have to say.
It's different, right? Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I just jotted down a couple of questions that I thought people, your audience, might like to hear. And I want to start with a little bit more about you, where you're coming from, maybe your personal professional history and the history of RMW Consulting.
Yeah, so my background is, I've been in e-commerce for over 20 years now and through all sorts of different roles, from starting as a software engineer after having an electrical engineering background to being at barnesandnoble.com, leading their marketplace, to CEO of Merchantry, and then leading the cross-border group at Pitney Bowes global e-commerce team. And then kind of as I started the consulting firm about 3 years ago, actually, I can't believe it's like 3.5 years now, basically. And it seems like the time is just flying by, which I guess is a good thing. I knew early on that I didn't want to be just like a freelancer, just helping people kind of on the side for projects. I wanted to have a firm that was able to attract its own clients. And to do that, lo and behold, you need to do marketing. And, it's something that actually I've always enjoyed is speaking and writing. It's so funny. About a year before I started the podcast, I started to get pretty regular requests, at least monthly, like, when is your podcast coming? When can we expect to hear more from you on a podcast? So it took me a little while to get my head around what that would look like.
Well, it was coming out of this incredible amount of content you were putting out on LinkedIn, which I was so impressed with. I mean, there were daily, maybe even twice daily sometimes, these long posts and all this information. So I could see why people who were reading that regularly would be like, we want more, How did you start developing that and just coming up with all of this really amazing amount of content about your industry?
Yeah, I think the content really just started from my own interest. And here's the problem with LinkedIn. So like my content journey just started on a blog. I started a blog. And of course, like everyone else, like no one reads anyone's blog. Like literally 0 people read any new blog ever. And so I started posting the content on Twitter and LinkedIn. And I found that LinkedIn had 90% of the traffic. So I'm like, okay, maybe I should start just posting on LinkedIn. That took me about 2 weeks to figure out. So I'm like, okay, I know if this is going to be valuable, I need to just be doing it every day and just treat it as, before I start work in the morning, I'm going to post something. And it's going to be about, a few different things. One is something recent that's happening in the industry. Second is maybe a meeting I had, a concept that came out of a meeting I had with somebody was struggling with that I thought someone else might benefit from. Sometimes I just pull from my own background. Hey, like 10 years ago, I did this thing and it didn't work at all. Like, let me tell you about it. So maybe you don't make the same mistake or something like that. So I think the short answer to your question is I do a lot of reading on the space, what's happening. And I try to just use the lens of who's going to care about this? And is it interesting enough to write about? Because there's a lot of things that are happening that aren't that meaningful, but there are a few things that are happening every week that people should pay attention to. And I try to pull those things out.
I mean, that leads into another question I had, which is, the show is so informative, and you're always coming up with these stories, and some of it's things that everyone reporting, and some of it's stuff that you're just not going to hear anywhere else. Where do you get your information? What are you reading that's made you into this? Because I got to say, a weekly show about a marketplace like you do would normally have this big staff of producers and writers and people producing segments and researching, and you really do all of the research and writing yourself, which is amazing. Where do you get all your information?
Yeah, the shorter answer is there are a few newsletters I like, a few industry publications. I like a lot of the retail dives and marketing dives. There are a few fundraising news sources that I like. One that I like in particular is called Axios Pro Rata, but there are a few others. Google Alerts are always a good source. So I have a set of keywords that I track for topics that I care about. And those tend to be the types of topics I write about on the show. Of course, anyone who's ever signed up for a Google Alert knows there's a lot of junk. If I get one email a day with 15 links, some days there's nothing in there that's useful. It's all spam or something. And some days there's 3 articles in there that I might want to write about. I also have a few Slack channels that I'm a member of. And so a lot of times those Slack channels, those are my testing grounds for ideas. So I might throw it to someone in my network and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? I think this is actually a huge mistake that Amazon is making. What do you guys think? And so I'll get feedback and I'll use that to test ideas. So I kind of have a few different ways to test ideas from people in my network. I also have an analyst, Kaylee, who's amazing, who works with me at RMW Commerce. She helps me find and summarize some of these articles as well.
So I bet your audience would love to hear more about the process of creating the show. Could you just walk us through what a typical week, what the production calendar looks like for a typical episode of the Watson Weekly?
Yeah. So the short answer is the Watson Weekly is based on a set formula. And the formula was studied pretty early on in that it's sort of 4 stories. And then a couple of months in, I also added some investor tidbits. And I remember when I brought that to you, you were like, oh, okay, something new.
It's your show, man. We're here for you. Whatever you want to do is great.
No, it's great. And so if you think about it, 4 articles plus kind of 4 to 5 investor tidbits, that's about an article a day. And so essentially, I need to write an article a day or that round about that pace. So the typical situation is the podcast comes out on Monday morning, but I will have recorded it that previous Thursday. And so it will be produced by your team, as you all know, but my listeners don't. You'll help me clean up everything, get it posted to all the channels out there, and then scheduled for Monday morning so that as my listeners are having their Monday morning coffee, or I don't know if, do people commute to work anymore? I remember when we first talked about, yeah, somebody must. I've also had people say they walk their dog to my podcast, which I think it's about the right length to walk a dog to, 10 or 15 minutes, maybe. I don't know.
Depends on the dog, I guess.
Yeah, you should probably be walking your dog. Like if you're walking your dog to my podcast, you should probably be walking your dog a longer time. Maybe you're listening to multiple podcasts, probably.
Maybe it's a small dog. Like a little, Bichon Frise or something, only wants a
a little Pomeranian.
Yeah, if you have a Rottweiler or, pit bull, you need 2 or 3 episodes, I would think, for a good.
Exactly. Yeah, just cue them up. So essentially, Thursday, I don't really write anything new. Wednesday, by the end of the day, Wednesday, I try to finalize the episode and go through any edits, kind of just look at everything, make sure that when I wake up Thursday morning.
On paper, you mean? You're writing things out on paper at that stage.
Yeah. So there are a lot of people, one of the things I saw was that, obviously there are lots of different types of podcasts. One is like this, where one person is being interviewed or there's a conversation. And then there are some podcasts that are just people talking without any prepared notes. And I think one of the things we found in our first couple of practice episodes that we did before launch was that the show flowed better and was tighter if things were written out.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the great things about the show is it's very concise. You make your points, you know exactly what you want to say. You've thought about how you want to say it. Because I think a lot of business podcasts, particularly a lot of sort of a CEO starts a podcast kind of podcast, can be very rambly and very kind of shaggy. And I love how this is just, it's a news source for people. It's concise. You get your digest. This is the news you need that week if you're in this industry, which I love.
Yeah. So some people ask me like, are you just talking off the cuff or you're writing it out? Actually, pretty much 99% of what you hear every week on the Watson Weekly, I've written out in advance, but it comes from me. I'm the person that's writing it. Although I do have some help with some of the sources, and then I wake up Thursday morning, I record it, send it off to you and the team, and that's when the magic happens.
And just shout out to Alex Brower, who does the post-production of your show, and he always does an amazing job on Thursday, Friday, just making it sound great. And then we publish it. We usually schedule it mid-end of the day Friday, so nobody has to work over the weekend, so it goes out first thing Monday morning for people.
Yeah. No, so that works out well.
So on my list of questions here, I have the words writer's block ? Are there ever times where you're like, there's nothing I want to talk about this week, or I have two things. What are the other two going to be? And what do you do then?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes I have to dig more than others. Sometimes, I go in a Thursday morning and actually I don't like one of them. I'll write something, and it may not be the story like I wish I had, but it's the story that's there because maybe it's a quiet week. Some weeks I have too many stories. I can't decide what to write about or which ones are the best ones to include. And some where I might have two good stories and then I have two stories that are like, this isn't so interesting. Sometimes I wake up Thursday morning and there's a new story and I'm like, well, if I don't include it in next week's podcast, then it's going to be a week and a half and the news like already is going to be old. It's going to be out there everywhere. So sometimes I'll write a new story Thursday morning if there's something new. And so it could even replace. So one answer to your question is like sometimes news stories replace ones I had written even the day, a few hours before I record the podcast, but I'll still like write it out and figure out what I think about it. Sometimes with a LinkedIn post. So that's one thing that helps me if I'm writing on LinkedIn every day is.
Which you still do, right? I mean, you've maintained
100%.
That in addition on, wow.
Yeah. So
you're a machine, man. Content machine.
So there is, obviously overlap between LinkedIn and the podcast, but usually I would say about 2 to the 4, 2 to 5 stories a week are probably shared with LinkedIn. But the nature of LinkedIn is that it's social media. So people are going to miss things. It's a different audience than listens to my podcast. So I've never had one person ever say like, hey, you should do something unique on your podcast because I've heard it before. I think LinkedIn is just naturally missed. There's so much noise on LinkedIn that even people who are looking for me sometimes don't find me.
Which I guess is the beauty of the podcast is that people who really want to hear your thoughts, they can subscribe and they won't miss anything. They'll never miss an episode.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the valuable things about a podcast that I find. And it's even better if you think about, I can have an email list. I'm like, well, how many email subscriptions does the average person have? Like hundreds.
10,000. I mean, that I know of.
Yeah, and they all go into the same spam or promotions folder, and you have to pick them out. And yeah, maybe three of those subscriptions might go into their inbox, but the rest of them will not. Whereas, if they're a frequent podcast listener, at least weekly or monthly, there's a much better chance that you're going to break through, with that.
Maybe that's a good segue. Tell me about the feedback you're getting about the show. What are people telling you?
Yeah, the feedback has been really great. I'm always impressed to hear the people that are listening to me. Like I might schedule a call with someone and they'll tell me, wow, I can't believe I'm actually talking to you, which is something
that's great.
I never thought I would hear. And, some people have told me, oh, I listen to your podcast every week. So especially if I go to like a trade show, like Shop Talk, I walked up to a couple of booths and I said, hey, I'm Rick Watson. I own a consulting business and I'd love to learn a little bit more about your product. And they were like, I know who you are. I'm like, what do you mean you know who I am? I don't know who you are.
You're experiencing celebrity. That's fantastic.
So first of all, I think people were surprised. Pod fade is a real thing. People start a podcast and then it dies after about a month. They stop
or
producing.
3 episodes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 3 or 4 episodes or something like that. And the fact that I've been consistent with it that was really my number one goal. Like, I didn't necessarily care how many people listened to it. I just wanted to be able to do it consistently so I can figure out what it was, and figure out if, is this going to be useful for people? And I think it has been. I definitely get really good feedback. I get people telling me they're learning new things from it all the time. And so if I'm able to help people in the industry, particularly people who are new to it, but also, people who have been in it a long time. But if you've only been in e-commerce for a year or two, there's so much to learn. And I think one of the original goals of the podcast wasn't just to report the news. Obviously, there's so many places to get news. It's an overload. But why do I think that this news is interesting or important, or what does it mean? That gives me the chance to put my own spin on it and to explain and to help teach the listener about part of e-commerce that maybe I know something about, maybe I don't. Maybe I've just done research for it for an article, but yeah, I just think it's one of the fascinating parts of the process.
Let's talk a little bit about the past year of e-commerce. I'm curious, now that we have a year of sort of, as you say, 10 stories a week, perhaps, to think back on. You often make predictions on the show where you're thinking, this is an important trend. I see these guys I think are making a mistake. These guys are doing the right thing. I'm curious if there's, looking back at the sort of stories you've reported on the last year, is there one that you're really proud of? You're like, I really got that right. I predicted this was going to happen and this happened. And on the other side, is there one where you just totally missed it? You said this is going to happen and the opposite happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult. I make predictions all the time, but I also don't like making predictions. What I love doing more than anything else is looking at an event that happened, a company does X, and then trying to get in the mind of the CEO or the company and the people there. It's like, why did they do this? And what does it mean for what they're going to do next? And I find that if I do that over and over and I read articles and I try to get in the head of the CEO, sometimes I can get actually pretty good at that. So I think one where I'm actually pretty proud of, where I definitely called it a few months in advance, was Amazon's launch of Buy with Prime. I didn't predict it would be called Buy with Prime, but I did predict that Amazon was going to try to move Prime off of Amazon, so that if you're a normal website, like if you're a Shopify merchant or a BigCommerce merchant, you're going to be able to offer products with the Prime promise and get that product to your customers within a day or two, because the logistics will be powered by Amazon. And I think I said that a few months before it came out. That came on the back of, okay, what did I see coming into that? The past 2 years, there was like very public news sort of leaking out of Amazon saying that they were trying to build a store maybe to compete with Shopify. And there was also sort of very public information that Amazon's general business was slowing down slightly and other types of e-commerce were growing. And so I kind of thought that if they're going to go and expand, they're going to try to expand and take a share off Amazon e-commerce. And that they're going to do that by trying to leverage, like, one of their big crown jewels is Prime. Like, how are we going to use Prime to gain more share for the consumer? So that, I think that was one of the interesting things that I enjoyed predicting. Look, I think all this post-COVID correction with e-commerce valuations, I don't think anyone got it right. And, I didn't necessarily predict that e-commerce was going to keep growing at the pace it did during the height of the pandemic. I didn't predict it would decline either. It's just more watching what was happening and helping people navigate those changes is kind of, one of the things that I do for my business.
I'm curious, too, looking back on the past year, are there any overarching trends, themes that you find particularly interesting, thinking back on everything that's happened in the last year of your industry?
Wow. I mean, the last couple of years, the last year has been really crazy with, it kind of takes us from the peak of COVID, no stores open, to now everything is reopened and people are wondering what things are going to stay with us permanently and which things are going to be transitory because of COVID. And so I think that's one of the biggest trends that I see in the articles I write, because companies that are in this situation or in e-commerce somewhere, they're trying to figure out what things do we need to keep investing in and which things should we ignore. We're like, oh, that was a COVID thing. No one's ever going to do that again, or, in that way. And I think kind of Peloton, for instance, had a moment and they started really overproducing the bikes. And then they got into a big trouble because, their supply chain costs were extremely high. And then that caused them to get a new CEO and who's still making changes. Meanwhile, someone like Target developed a curbside business, which is one of the biggest drivers of their growth right now. And I don't think curbside is going away. And so I think those sorts of things, like what things are going to stay with us and what things are not going to stay with us, I think are going to be some of the most interesting things kind of going forward and that I've learned over the past year.
Tell me about moving forward with the podcast. What are you seeing for the next year? Do you have goals? Do you have plans? Anything you'd like to do that we're not currently doing? Let's have an on-air production meeting. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds great. Great, David. I think, in terms of goals for the podcast is, I'd love to keep increasing, the listenership and the visibility of what we're doing. I think having more regular e-commerce industry thought leaders on here,
yep,
I think would be super interesting. I also think playing with sponsorship. I know there are a lot of companies that would be interesting to get in front of the audience that I'm trying to cultivate. And again, my goal was never to be the widest industry. I didn't want to have the most listeners or subscribers. I wanted the most important ones. I wanted the decision makers
totally
as my listeners. And so I think as one of the things that I've noticed from the podcast is that I definitely have been getting more speaking engagements. And I think it's probably because people can hear me every week and you're like, actually, well, I'd love to if he would come to talk to my company. And so I think that will bring the podcast on the road. I actually went to a conference earlier this year, Global E-commerce Leaders Forum, where I was something I never thought would ever happen to me. I was the featured podcaster or something. I don't know what the hell they called it.
Yeah, I remember the signs. You sent us pictures. They had the official conference podcasting suite set up for you to do, a couple of interviews. It was fantastic.
Yeah, so I was interviewing the speakers, that were on the stage and sort of featured guests there. And that was fun. I'd love to do that again if there are events, that are out there that would love to see that kind of thing too. So those are some of the goals that I think about.
This has been a lot of fun, Rick. I think the listeners are really going to enjoy it. Any final thoughts about the year that was, the year to come, the podcast in general that you want to share?
Yeah. I mean, I would love to just continue to meet subscribers that are out there. Feel free to reach out to me directly, rick@rmwcommerce.com. Really, the podcast was made to be as useful as possible because I think one of the most interesting things is when I started the podcast, I just searched on e-commerce and Spotify and Apple and e-commerce podcasts. And I found that, 80% of the podcasts out there were kind of two things. One is it was like, oh, my husband, my partner quit their job and started an e-commerce site and now I'm a millionaire. How do you do it? You can do it too. That was one e-commerce podcast.
Let's call that the one step away from multi-level marketing model of e-commerce podcasting.
Right. And the other one was basically just guest interviews. And so they would wake up every week or every month. And it wasn't as frequent. It was interviewing people. I didn't find that the interview scripts were very good. A lot of times podcasts take a long time to get to the point. And so I thought from a positioning point of view, what if I could do the opposite of that? Can I just be weekly, timely, interesting? You don't have to wait around. I think within 10, 15 seconds of every Watson Weekly, I'm already starting on stories. I don't even tell you who I am until the end, right? So that's one of the things I think I'm most proud of is it's not about me. It's really about helping the audience understand the space just a little bit better that week.
Well, speaking for me and my team, I think what you do is fantastic. And it's been amazing to hear you grow into it and get better and better. And we're really proud to partner with you and to help make this show happen, and can't wait for the next year and the one after that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David. I really enjoy working with you and the CitizenRacecar team, and onward and upward.
Onward and upward.
That's all for this week. Till next time, Watsonians. Hi, I'm Rick Watson, CEO and founder of RMW Commerce Consulting and host of the Watson Weekly Podcast, your essential e-commerce digest. Our show is produced by CitizenRacecar. Alex Brower is the producer and also wrote our theme music. The executive producer is David Hoffman. To hear new episodes of the show every Monday morning, subscribe now at rmwcommerce.com/Watson Weekly and wherever you get your podcasts.